Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Baltimore WordPress Meetup. Ask Me Anything. Accessibility is the topic today. The Baltimore WordPress Meetup recordings are usually available on YouTube in about 2 weeks or so, thanks to our volunteers. The links that are shared in the chat, so go ahead, find your chat, open your chat. The links that are shared in the chat will be available at the very end of the YouTube video. So if you missed a link from the chat, go check the end of the video. This meetup is informational. Please use the information, products, and services that we show at your own risk. Just because we show something, such as a website, plugin, theme, or otherwise, is not an official WordPress endorsement of it. As always, many of us are attending from home, so make sure to keep everything family-friendly, aka G-rated. We will do our best to follow the WordPress guidelines for community standards. If you break these rules, there are 3 of us with host permissions and we will evict you. No spamming or spammer-like behavior. We have people of all different skill levels and backgrounds, so no judgment for people who are at a different point in their journey than where you currently are at. And generally speaking, don't be a jerk. We have a few sponsors to thank before we get into our meetup. The first sponsor is Anfira. Anfira helps companies serious about their WordPress development needs. They specialize in helping agencies and businesses that are frustrated by their WordPress challenges. If you're looking for help, go ahead and visit anfira.com/help, and this link will be in the chat. Our second sponsor is the Easy Alley Guide. The Easy Alley Guide works to make web accessibility easier to implement through done-for-you tools and processes. For more information on web accessibility, including a whole wide Learn section, go ahead and visit easyalleyguide.com. And our third sponsor is OB Digital Consulting. OB sponsors our video recordings and prepares them for YouTube. Contact them for assistance with your video production needs. Some quick admin before we get started. Find your Zoom chat. Open your Zoom chat. We use the Zoom chat a lot. You will start out muted. We'll unmute you to answer. No one knows everything, so we will do our best. It is going to just be open questions today. If you want to speak your questions, chat about your questions, just put a question mark in the chat. If you just have a short question, you just want to type it out, go ahead and type it in the chat. Simon has a question. Simon, you are up first. Go ahead.
All right. So I don't mean to start heavy, but I'm
Go
curious,
for it.
Jen. With the federal government and executive orders to do away with DEI programs throughout the government, and that spilling over to larger companies who want to follow suit, what impact are you seeing that have on accessibility, work and opportunities, resources, client interest in your field of influence, and what do you anticipate its ramifications will be?
Okay. Big multi-part question to start with. Excellent. Good job, Simon. Keeping me on my toes. So in Trump's first term, around 2017, 2018, Trump gave the order to the Department of Justice to stop going after anything related to accessibility. Prior to that, the Department of Justice had been doing a lot of prosecution, a lot of going after companies for lack of website compliance for accessibility. And what happened was the Department of Justice stopped enforcing it. Enforcement didn't stop, it just moved. It moved to private lawsuits. Prior to then, there were almost no private lawsuits regarding accessibility. Now we have thousands a year, and we have even more going on with demand letters and whatnot. We don't have an accurate count on those because they're not, they don't make it to an actual court case, so they don't get recorded into some national ledger where it can be accessed and counted up. So we don't know, but anecdotally from some of the law firms, they have shared that Demand letter versus lawsuit, there's significantly more demand letters than there are lawsuits. So based on that, we can gather that it's in the tens of thousands of demand letters that are going out each year and thousands of lawsuits each year. So enforcement for the law did not stop. It just moved. So what I expect to see is more of that again in the second term. Enforcement of the law will not stop. It will just continue to be done through private lawsuits and demand letters. ADA Title II goes into effect next year, April of 2026. It's not going to be enforced by the federal government. There's not going to be any support from the federal government. So what's going to happen? It's all going to be private lawsuits. And I would expect that it's going to be a floodgate of private lawsuits. It would take an act of Congress to undo the Americans with Disabilities Act. At this point, I'm not entirely sure if Congress can brush their own teeth. So I don't actually expect them to overhaul a giant piece of legislation. Over in Europe, since the world is not, in fact, just the United States, there's an entire globe. Canada has their own laws regarding accessibility. The provinces have laws for private entities. Ontario has it for large private entities, 50 employees or more. Manitoba, interestingly enough, has it for small private entities, as in only one employee. And that is applicable in Manitoba. And of course, in Europe, the European Accessibility Act goes into effect in June of 2025, and that will affect American businesses who are selling to Europe. It is specifically exempts micro enterprises. So if you have less than 2 million euros per year in global revenue and less than 10 employees, you're a micro enterprise and it doesn't apply. But for a huge number of US businesses, the European Accessibility Act will be significant. And Europe went after GDPR very hard. It was a huge impact for many, many businesses, and I expect that the European Accessibility Act will be similar. As far as private companies in the US trying to disown DEI, well, I think that is knee-jerk. I think that probably in a few months, things, well, will be different than they are right now. I guess I can't say for certain what they're going to be, but I think right now there's a whole lot of knee-jerk going on, and within a couple months, the courts are going to start catching up and saying, no, a massive amount of this is illegal. And I think there's going to be some undo buttons that are pressed, some that kind of pull back and kind of try to undo some of the things that are done once the courts rule that it's illegal. Exactly how much, the timeline, I can't predict that. Does that help at all, Simon? Do you have any follow-up
Very,
questions?
very, very much so. Um, what do you think will be the impact on enforcement of Section 508?
Section 508 will be enforced via private lawsuits. It already
Right.
has
Okay.
been enforced via private lawsuits. There are already several lawsuits that have happened. There are several lawsuits that are currently happening, and there will be more lawsuits that will happen. But I see Section 508 as being primarily enforced via private lawsuits, whether that will result in private settlements, aka millions of dollars get paid out, and with those go gag orders. I don't know, but it's going to all be via private lawsuits.
Okay, that makes sense. Are you getting questions from your clients or other people in the industry, or sort of the whole knee-jerk thing? Because there's been a new acronym coined recently called DEIA, which includes
Mhm.
accessibility in that. So I don't know if you're seeing any repercussions yet from.
Yes, I have seen that some companies are canceling projects or postponing projects or sticking projects into a hold state while all of this shakes out. Again, it's going to take several months to go through the court systems. So we won't really know exactly what those ramifications are until probably late spring or more likely summer. But there's the court systems are going to be just absolutely flooded, and it's going to be things going after the orders themselves, things going after what the company did in response to the orders, and also just a whole bunch of private civil lawsuits.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate your insight.
Yep. How about you? What have you been seeing?
Mostly fear, uncertainty, and doubt.
Hmm.
The same kind of like hold our breath. I read an interesting article the other day about Google sort of playing both sides of the spectrum. Last week they
Yep. Hmm.
did their own DEI disappearing act, plus the whole it's okay to use AI for weaponization and security things. So I have a friend who's a Googler who's kind of not really in the midst of that, but she knows folks on the accessibility arm of them, and I think they're a little confused because on the one hand, Google wants to be accessible, on the other hand, it wants to continue having federal contracts, and making money.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yes, in general, Google has discovered that if people can't use your search engine, they go elsewhere. If people
right.
can't use your tools, they go elsewhere. So Google has a lot of financial interest in making sure that people can use their tools. So I think what's going to happen, especially for companies like them, is they're going to spin it differently. They're going to get their lawyers involved and they're going to try and make sure that the language for their various programs is updated. And they're going to try and change it from DEI focused to revenue focused. Because the government's not going to come and say, especially not Trump, he's not going to say stop making money
Right.
to private companies.
Yeah.
So instead of using inclusive language, they're going to use revenue driven language because, quite frankly, many companies have discovered that if it's easier to use, if it's more accessible, you get higher conversion rates. And
Hmm.
so they're going to focus on this is a revenue driving arm of our company. This arm of our company is on maximizing revenue. So they're going to change some of their people, they're going to relabel things, and they're going to say, all right, this is about just user journey optimization for revenue.
Hmm.
So instead of calling it accessibility, they're going to call it, user journey or
UX. Yeah. Yeah. Which
whatever
is a
else they want to call it.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
they're going to tie it to revenue because that's also going to tell their shareholders and whatnot, this is a revenue driving department
Right.
because it
Right.
is. It does drive
Hmm.
their revenue.
Yeah, yeah. And I've heard you talk about how you kind of use a similar tact with selling accessibility, sort of touting it as user experience. Do you want your customers to be able to use your app on a phone outside in the sun? That kind of question.
Exactly.
Cool.
So, the answer is most accessibility things tie back to revenue. They tie back to, do you want people to complete the operation or go to your competitor? Pick one. Lish had a question on 508. Section 508 of the Rehabilitation Act is a federal law that governs federal websites. Specifically, it says that federal websites need to meet a slightly altered version of WCAG 2.0 level double A, and this is officially called the Section 508 guidelines. So that's what 508 is. It's a specific set of WCAG version 2 guidelines for US federal agencies. And they've been very bad at meeting them, but some of them have been improving somewhat over the years.
So are we talking about language? When you talk about inclusivity, are we talking about language? What exactly are they looking, what kind of violations are we talking about? And when you talk about federal, are these websites that are run by the federal government, or are these just,
Yes.
okay, or
So Section 508 applies to websites that end in .gov,
Okay.
and it also applies to certain organizations. They can be for-profit, they can be not-for-profit, which receive certain federal funds.
I see.
Jean put in a question, are we liable if the website follows WCAG AA, but the clients post non-accessible PDFs and documents? Jean, would you mind unmuting and clarifying a little bit on that?
Sorry, I had pushed the audio off the screen so I could take notes on the right. And you have to listen to my puppy, sorry. My question is, so I have made my websites for my clients accessible. And despite repeated requests that they make their PDFs, which is their minutes, their resolutions, whatever, as an accessible document. Most of them do not send me scans anymore, but they don't use headings. They use pretend lists. It's just not accessible. And I've gotten to the point where I don't have time to go in and fix all these documents they're sent. I'd have more than one client. I can't be doing this all day long. So I'm wondering if I just leave it, put it up like they send it to me, am I going to be liable if when the client gets sued? Because I'm sure they will.
Yes, so the client themselves is liable. Whether that liability blows back onto you will depend a lot on the contract that you have with them and the language in that contract.
Okay, so I should rewrite my contract saying that when the site as of today is accessible, it adheres to the guidelines, but I am not responsible for documents
You're
non-accessible.
not responsible for, so generally speaking, I have less specific language and more general language regarding liability for websites in my contracts because I want to make them as future resistant as we can. So basically the liability for the website is on the client. And I go with more general language, and it pushes the liability for basically everything regarding that website onto the client.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Lish has put another question into the chat. I'm fairly new to WordPress and wondering about Flexbox. Do I need to use that for things like a spacer? Okay, so are you familiar and comfortable with CSS Flexbox?
No, I don't use CS. I use Flexbox, but I'm not using CSS code to create and do anything.
But are you familiar with all of the basics of Flexbox?
Yeah. I mean, at this point, yeah. I think so.
Properties, orders, flex direction, stuff like that.
Well, that's like more of a developer thing. I'm just working in WordPress as a graphic designer. So I was, I know that
You need to, yeah, I would definitely recommend that you get quite familiar with the CSS tricks Flexbox information. This page is just a gold mine. I have the poster printed out and everything. It's a really wonderful website because you need to understand the concepts, how Flexbox works in order to design well with the tool.
I guess just I just wasn't sure whether it was, for images and all of that stuff. When I'm starting adding in complicated information, it seems like I can understand using it, but for something simple, do I need it? Because it just adds in more stuff into a website. So I was just wondering, in principle, is it required or not? Does everything require a container at this point in WordPress?
It depends on what you are, what builder are you using?
Elementor.
Okay, so yes, in Elementor, you really need containers for everything. I really do recommend if you're using Elementor that you get comfortable with those containers and you use them.
Okay, good. Thank you. Yeah, good answer. Okay, I wasn't sure.
Yes. And Doug posted the link also to Grid, Elementor, in addition to having Flexbox, it also has Grid. So Grid is definitely for more advanced layouts. A lot of people like to just get comfortable with Flexbox and skip Grid. Grid can do more powerful things, but with more powerful tools comes more responsibility. So I always recommend that people start with Flexbox and get really comfortable with Flexbox before they look at Grid.
Yeah, when I was looking at Grid, I did some tutorials on Grid, and it appeared to be something that was for like multiple images that get highly repetitive, you know, that kind of thing. Yeah, for I could see the application for commercial, highly commercial sites.
Oh yeah, Grid can be very useful, but I start with Flexbox. Simon has asked another question. Which resources are resonating the most with your users? What tools and resources am I planning to release in 2025? So the big thing that is coming out is the SOP pile. So this is a giant pile of SOPs, or standard operating procedures, regarding a huge number of things. So you talked about my 3 yeses sales strategy. And so I will have a specific SOP on the 3 yeses and going over how to use that with examples so that people can get going. Also resources on audits and developer and design. It is being fleshed out at the moment, and there is a discount running for the month of February with the code LTD. And I'll put that in the chat. And that is going to be both a discount off of the subscription for the standard operating procedures and also on the renewal cost for those. So that is going to be the big thing that is coming out for 25. The big question I've been getting is, how do I just get ridden out all of these little things that have to be done, that all the little things that have to be. The other thing, the tool is the audit checklist builder. And that one, I built this for myself, but it's also been really popular because here we have just the big grid so that you can go through a specific web page and see what the criteria is, including a simplified explanation. Then you can put in the conformance answer. You can list the issue source. And one of the really important things when you're doing a productive audit for someone is telling them where the issue comes from. And then, of course, a free space to put notes about it. And then once you fill out the grid, you generate the report, and the report puts all the information from the grid into the report that you can copy and paste to your favorite tool for sending reports. Do you have any follow-ups on that, Simon?
Yeah, so for the SOP pile, you mentioned it, is that sort of aimed more towards accessibility agencies that do audits, remediation, that sort of thing, or toward, web agencies that are building WordPress sites?
Yes.
Which target audience do you have in mind with that?
Both. So it is for the first section, the sales section, that's really for anyone trying to sell accessibility to people. And so if you're an agency and you're fulfilling accessibility for, others, then you still need to get into sales, because if you don't talk about sales, if you don't have a sales strategies and processes, then that's where I've heard a lot of people are like, I can't sell it. Okay, well, we need to work on that. Then there's also processes for how to do the audits. And then there's also processes for when we get into design and development. And a lot of times you're asked, okay, this is a problem with the website. What does it need to be to fix it? So you may not be necessarily doing the fixes, but you still need to tell them what it needs to look like in a final state. And then if you are the one building it, for example, a lot of the general agencies, you need to understand and have specific processes for your development team so that they know what the results should be, what they should actually have done when they're done building it.
Great, thank you.
All right, were there any other questions? I'll leave it open for about another minute or so, see if we get any more questions. Otherwise, for getting help outside of meetup times, and we have another meetup, which is tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern, and that is just a general Ask Me Anything WordPress. And since it's in the evening, my slides will even be in better condition. But in general, if you are looking for WordPress help outside of meetup hours, please take a look at the Baltimore WordPress meetup webpage. And since we didn't get any more questions, I will turn off recording.